have to imagine a ship so powerful it could bring an entire nation to its knees. For me, the Bismarck was the Death Star. It was a kind of mechanized warfare that hopefully will never exist again.
Beneath the icy waves of the North Atlantic, nearly 5 kilometers down, lies the legendary German battleship Bismarck, lost to history for decades. In May 1941, when she thundered into battle, Bismarck was the very embodiment of the Third Reich's unstoppable power. After sinking the Royal Navy's Pride, HMS Hood, she became the target of one of the most relentless naval hunts in history. A 2-day chase that ended with her sinking into the abyss. For decades, her resting place remained a mystery, and the truth of her final moments was unknown. Questions lingered. How did a battleship of such immense armor finally fall? And what really happened in her last hours? Now, thanks to an underwater drone mission to her wreck, we finally have the answers. The last piece of the puzzle revealed. Before we dive into this incredible journey, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss a story that brings history back to life. Let's unveil the whole truth. Discovery of the wreck. In June 1989, marine geologist and oceanographer Robert Duane Ballard led a landmark expedition that finally located the wreck of the German battleship Bismarck, a vessel whose dramatic end had fascinated naval historians for nearly half a century. Ballard, who was then affiliated with the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution in Massachusetts, had already gained international recognition for locating the wreck of RMS Titanic in 1985. His objective with Bismarck was to resolve lingering questions about how the pride of the Kriegsmarine met her fate on 27 May 1941, after a running battle with the Royal Navy. Although the British Admiralty had recorded the approximate coordinates of the sinking, some 650 kilometers west of Brest, France, the precise position remained elusive, buried under almost 5 kilometers of Atlantic water. Ballard's mission was not only to find the ship, but also to document her condition with the best imaging technology available at the time. Why? Well, he wanted to settle the debate once and for all. Was she destroyed by British gunfire and torpedoes, or deliberately scuttled by her own crew? The 1989 search relied on technology that represented the cutting edge of deep-sea exploration. The central tool was Argo, a towed camera sled developed by the U.S. Navy and Woods Hole scientists. Argo functioned as a remotely operated vehicle, or ROV, before that term became common, carrying high-resolution video cameras, still cameras, and powerful lights capable of illuminating the pitch-black depths. The system was designed to hover roughly 50 meters above the seafloor while being towed behind the research vessel Knorr, sending live video and sonar data back to the surface through a fiber optic cable. Ballard had perfected this method during the Titanic expedition, and the Bismarck search applied the same strategy. Tow Argo back and forth in a grid pattern over the suspected site until debris appeared on the monitors. Once key targets were identified, the team planned to use the 3-person submersible Alvin for close-up examination and photography. Alvin, owned by Woods Hole, had a pressure-resistant titanium sphere that allowed it to dive safely to depths beyond 4,500 meters. Researchers could thus inspect the wreck directly. After days of systematic sweeps across the designated search box, Argo's cameras finally transmitted unmistakable images of large steel debris scattered on the seabed. On the 8th of June 1989, the expedition confirmed that it had found the Bismarck resting at a depth of approximately 4,791 meters. The coordinates placed the wreck roughly 650 kilometers west of Brest, near the southern end of the mid-Atlantic ridge. Geological surveys revealed that the battleship lay against the slope of an extinct undersea volcano. The site was eerily quiet and devoid of strong currents, which had helped preserve the wreck for nearly 5 decades. The team noted that the ship had come to rest upright, its bow pointing upslope, as if it had settled gently despite the violent battle and catastrophic flooding that sent it down. The overall structural integrity of the wreck astonished the scientists. At more than 250 meters in length when afloat, the Bismarck was still largely in one piece, her hull sitting upright on the keel with minimal deformation in the heavily armored central citadel. The exception was the stern, which was entirely missing. Subsequent mapping indicated that this section had torn away either during the final plunge or when the ship struck the seafloor, a fate not uncommon for vessels whose sterns housed vulnerable structural transitions and heavy machinery spaces. Debris from the stern trailed down the volcanic slope for hundreds of meters. Close visual inspection using Alvin and later high-definition imaging confirmed a pattern of damage consistent with the running battle of May 1941. The superstructure, command towers, upper decks, and gun mounts showed extensive shell and fire damage, including jagged holes from heavy-caliber British naval shells. Several large apertures punctured the main deck, and the charred remains of the forward turrets bore witness to the bombardment by HMS Rodney and HMS King George V. Yet the armored belt along the sides of the ship, which measured up to 320 millimeters thick, was designed to resist heavy artillery, and this appeared largely unbreached. Investigators counted 8 major holes above the original waterline, 1 on the starboard side and 7 on the port side. These punctures, while significant, did not extend below the main armor belt, meaning they would not have caused catastrophic flooding of the inner citadel during the battle itself. Perhaps the most remarkable discovery was that there were no penetrations through the thick armored plating shielding Bismarck's crucial machinery and magazines. Ballard's team examined the hull from bow to stern using Argos cameras, expecting to find large holes or torpedo damage. Instead, the armor remained completely intact. The 1989 expedition collected thousands of still photos, hours of video footage, and detailed sonar maps, all meticulously catalogued for naval historians and engineers. Measurements of the surrounding debris showed that smaller fragments, including secondary guns and pieces of structural plating, were spread across an area roughly 3 by 5 kilometers. The ship's upright position was explained by its location on the side of an extinct volcanic seamount. The gentle slope allowed the hull to slide instead of crashing onto the abyssal plain, preserving not just the battleship's overall shape, but also delicate details like railings and deck equipment, giving an unmatched view of a World War II capital ship, even at the bottom of the ocean. Later expeditions in the years following Ballard's initial discovery have returned to the site. Subsequent underwater drone missions. Starting in June 2001, a joint expedition by Deep Ocean Expeditions and the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution returned to the Bismarck site for further exploration. This mission used modern ROVs and mini-submersibles to expand on the discoveries from Ballard's 1989 expedition. The team, including marine experts such as William N. Lang from Woods Hole, noted that the upper sections of Bismarck's superstructure and decks were riddled with shell holes, consistent with intense gunfire. However, Lange and others observed that there were not that many holes along the sides of the ship, and none below the waterline that penetrated the main armor belt. One key result of the 2001 survey was a detailed mapping of the debris field surrounding Bismarck. The wreck's environment was carefully scanned, revealing fragments of the ship's structure and objects that had broken away during the sinking, impact, or the slide down the underwater slope. Using ROV-mounted cameras and sonar, the team documented large gashes in the hull. Many of these were determined to have resulted from the ship striking the seafloor and sliding down the slope of the underwater volcanic formation where it rests. In 2002, James Cameron led a more cinematic but equally sophisticated expedition, producing the documentary Expedition Bismarck. Building on prior surveys, this mission employed Russian-built Mir submersibles, Mir 1 and Mir 2, along with ROV probes, to capture both exterior and interior imagery of Bismarck. These dives provided the first significant interior views, including compartments, passageways, rudder mechanisms, the command bridge, and inner hull details. Cameron's team took precise measurements and observations that refined earlier findings, noting that although roughly 719 large-caliber shells had been fired at Bismarck by British battleships Rodney and King George V during the final battle, only 2 confirmed penetrations through the 320mm main side belt armor were visible on the sections examined. Their imaging also revealed long tears in the hull plating at the lower edge of the armor belt, but these were mostly linked to the ship striking the seabed and the stress of sliding down the slope, rather than direct shell or torpedo hits during battle. Cameron's team also noted that decks beneath the armored deck had been compressed by 3 to 4 meters, showing just how violently the sinking and impact had warped the internal structure. But that's not the whole story. Beyond the 2001 and 2002 missions, there have been private and documentary-led explorations. Advances like higher resolution video, improved sonar, and more agile ROVs and AUVs, autonomous underwater vehicles, have made mapping more precise and allowed better-lit interior shots. Cameron's 2002 expedition, in particular, benefited from these more nimble submersibles and upgraded imaging systems compared with what was available in 1989. These subsequent missions have been a major boon for naval archaeology, providing solid data that has let researchers confirm or refine earlier claims about armor belt integrity, structural damage, and the relative impact of scuttling versus combat. So, what have we learned from all of this? The thick main side belt armor shows almost no full penetrations. Aside from a couple of confirmed breaches observed during Cameron's expedition, most of the damage doesn't pierce this key defensive layer. The superstructure, including upper decks, turret tops, and the bridge, is heavily pocked with shell holes, deformations, and signs of fire. Interior compartments show flooding and collapsed sections. The wreck rests on the slope of an extinct undersea volcano, and when Bismarck hit the seabed, massive forces tore and displaced the lower hull plating. Its slide down the volcano's flank scattered debris and twisted parts of the hull. And now, the million-dollar question. Was Bismarck sunk by heavy artillery from pursuing British warships, or was it deliberately scuttled? We'll get to that shortly. But first, let's reconstruct the events leading up to it for some context, shall we? How did Bismarck meet her end? Scuttling versus battle damage. The German battleship Bismarck was launched on the 14th of February 1939 and commissioned on the 24th of August 1940. She was one of the most formidable warships ever built, displacing roughly 41,700 metric tons, armed with 8 massive 15-inch guns, heavily armored, and designed to challenge British naval dominance. Under Captain Ernst Lindemann and Fleet Command by Admiral Günther Lütjens, Bismarck set out on Operation Rheinübung in May 1941, accompanied by the heavy cruiser Prinz Eugen, with the mission to strike Allied shipping in the Atlantic. At dawn on the 24th of May 1941, Bismarck and Prinz Eugen encountered the British battlecruiser HMS Hood and the newly commissioned battleship HMS Prince of Wales, northwest of Iceland. Around 5:52, both German ships opened fire from a range of about 25,000 yards. Within minutes, Bismarck's 15-inch shells hit their mark. At 6 o'clock, a salvo penetrated Hood's after magazines, triggering a massive explosion that split the British flagship in two and killed 1,415 of her 1,418 crew. Prince of Wales managed to hit Bismarck several times, damaging a forward fuel tank and reducing her top speed to roughly 28 knots. But mechanical failures and shell damage forced her to disengage. After the battle, Admiral Lutyens steered Bismarck toward Saint-Nazaire in France for repairs, while Prince Eugen went off on independent raids. British forces scrambled to track and intercept the battleship. Aircraft from the carrier HMS Victorious attacked on the night of the 25th of May, scoring a single torpedo hit that caused minor damage. Using evasive maneuvers and strict radio silence, Bismarck briefly eluded her pursuers, prompting an intense Atlantic-wide search. The reprieve was short-lived. On 26 May, an RAF Catalina flying boat spotted the ship 690 nautical miles west of Brest. That evening, swordfish biplanes from HMS Ark Royal braved heavy fire and stormy weather to strike again. One torpedo jammed Bismarck's rudder at a 12-degree angle, crippling her maneuverability and sealing her fate. Overnight, British destroyers harassed the ship with torpedoes and gunfire, preventing any chance of repair. At dawn, on 27 May, the battleships HMS Rodney and HMS King George V, supported by heavy cruisers Norfolk and Dorsetshire, closed in roughly 300 nautical miles west of Brest. Starting at 8:47, they unleashed a relentless barrage. Over 700 large-caliber shells and numerous torpedoes struck Bismarck, wrecking her superstructure, silencing her guns, and setting her ablaze. By late morning, she drifted as a burning, battered hulk. Around 10:40, Dorsetshire fired two final torpedoes. Moments later, Bismarck rolled to port and sank stern first. Of the more than 2,200 men aboard, only 114 survived, rescued by British ships and the German U-boat U-74. Now, this is where the real mystery begins. Several German survivors claimed that Bismarck was scuttled by her own crew in her final moments to avoid capture. Among them was Gerhard Unack, Bismarck's chief engineering officer, who later said he ordered demolition charges to be set in compartments with 9-minute fuses. Though the intercom system failed, and a messenger sent to confirm the order did not return. Survivors also testified that valves and watertight doors were open to accelerate flooding after the ship had been so badly damaged that resistance was impossible. These German accounts have formed part of the argument that, while Bismarck had sustained heavy combat damage, some acts of deliberate scuttling were carried out to ensure she sank. When Robert Ballard's expedition discovered the wreck in 1989, he reported seeing very few, if any, penetrations through the mainside armor belt below the waterline. The armor that was intended to protect the most vital parts of Bismarck, such as machinery spaces and magazines, appeared largely intact. The damage was concentrated on the superstructure, decks, gun houses, and areas above the main belt. Based on those observations, Ballard suggested that battle damage alone might not have been sufficient to sink Bismarck rapidly, and that scuttling actions contributed materially to her sinking. He emphasized that the hull did not show signs of implosion, something that would have been expected if flooding had been sudden and overwhelming from below the waterline. Relatively intact armor suggests controlled flooding or internal measures that allowed the ship to settle rather than break apart immediately. Other historians and exploration teams contend that British firepower and torpedo damage were sufficient to doom Bismarck, even without scuttling. Key among these is David Mearns. His 2001 Anglo-American expedition found gashes in the ship's hull that they interpreted as being initiated by torpedo hits, especially in the starboard amidships region. These holes, though partly enlarged by the slide down the slope after the wreck settled, remain evidence of combat damage. It is argued that the torpedo from the Swordfish planes that struck her stern, disabling the rudders, was a decisive event. The loss of steering rendered Bismarck unable to escape or maneuver, making subsequent close-range fire from Rodney, King George V, and others far more lethal. Estimates suggest that over 2,800 shells were fired by British ships, with more than 400 hits scored. These shell hits devastated the superstructure, blew away gun turrets, ignited fires, knocked out main battery turrets, and compromised boiler rooms. Historians like Garsky and Doolin argue that this mix of damage would have caused uncontrollable flooding, loss of buoyancy, and eventual sinking, even if scuttling charges had never been set. So, what actually happened? Bismarck's final fate wasn't caused solely by battle damage or scuttling. It was the combination of both. First, the ship was badly crippled by British attacks. Torpedoes from Swordfish planes jammed her rudders. Heavy shell fire from King George V and Rodney on 27th May hit hard, and maybe 9 additional damaging strikes affected her ability to fight. These hits caused fires, loss of weapons, boiler failures, and flooding, leaving Bismarck severely wounded and mostly dead in the water. Then, according to German survivors, scuttling charges and the opening of internal valves and doors began around 9:30 to speed up flooding and stop the British from capturing her. The order, usually linked to Executive Officer Hans Uels after Captain Lindemann and Admiral Lutyens were incapacitated, involved opening watertight doors, and possibly sabotaging engine rooms via valves. Most agree this only sped up the sinking by minutes rather than hours. Functionally, Bismarck was already beyond saving. Experts like Ballard suggest that without scuttling, she might have stayed afloat for several more hours, maybe even a full day. But survival or rescue was unlikely. Others argue scuttling simply hastened the inevitable, rather than changing the outcome already decided by the damage. Bismarck's design, with a heavy armor belt, delayed catastrophic flooding. But once control was lost and internal damage worsened, it was only a matter of time before she sank. Survivor accounts, wreck analyses, and expert studies all show that scuttling didn't come out of nowhere. It happened because battle damage had already made the ship unsalvageable, ensuring she sank instead of being captured. Today, historians generally agree that both battle damage and scuttling together caused Bismarck's sinking. That's it for now. Thanks for watching. Did you enjoy this video? If so, consider liking, leaving a comment, and hitting the subscribe button so you don't miss future uploads. And don't forget to check out the video on your screen right now. It's truly unbelievable.